The rain fell hard on the streets of New Phoenix City. It was the kind of rain that made people run for cover and close their windows. But in the lower districts of the colony, where the poor lived and the forgotten stayed, the rain was just another part of life. Pete Callahan sat alone in a small food stall near the edge of the market. He was an old man now, 73 years old, with white hair and a face full of scars. His hand shook a little when he lifted his fork. His left leg was made of metal and clicked when he walked. But his eyes were still sharp, still watching everything around him like a hawk. 40 years ago, Pete had been one of the most famous dragon fighters in the galaxy. He had commanded a warship called the Ironside, and he had killed 17 void dragons in battles across the Outer Rim. The void dragons were terrible creatures. They were bigger than buildings, with wings that could block out the sun and breath that burned hotter than any fire. They had come from deep space when humanity first started building colonies on other worlds, and they had killed millions of people before humans learned to fight back. Pete had been part of that fight. He had watched his friends die. He had felt dragon fire burn his skin. He had done things that still gave him nightmares. And in the end, humanity had won. They pushed the dragons back to the edges of known space and built a civilization across 100 worlds. But victory had a price. Pete had paid that price with his health, his friends, and his peace of mind. Now he lived alone in a small apartment, eating cheap food and waiting for death to finally come for him. The rain kept falling. Pete looked down at his plate. Synthetic protein and vegetable paste. It tasted like nothing, but it kept him alive. He was about to take another bite when he heard a small voice behind him. "Sir, can I have the leftovers?" Pete turned around slowly. Standing in the shadows of the alley was a boy. He was small and thin, maybe 9 or 10 years old. His clothes were torn and dirty. His hair was wet from the rain. But what Pete noticed most were his eyes. They were not the eyes of a beggar. They were not filled with shame or desperation. They were proud, defiant, like the eyes of a young soldier who had seen too much but refused to break. Pete had seen many homeless children in the lower districts. Most of them had lost their parents to the dragon wars or the diseases that came after. Most of them begged or stole to survive. But this boy was different. He stood straight. He looked Pete in the eye. He asked for leftovers, not charity. Something moved in Pete's chest. A feeling he had not felt in many years. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was hope. "What's your name, son?" Pete asked. The boy hesitated. Danny Marsh." "Wow, Danny Marsh," Pete said, pushing his entire plate across the table. "You don't eat a warrior's scraps. You sit down and eat with him." Danny stared at the plate. For a moment, Pete thought the boy might refuse. Pride could be a stubborn thing, but hunger was stronger. Danny sat down across from Pete and began to eat. He did not eat like a starving animal. He ate slowly, carefully, like someone who had learned to make every bite count. Pete watched him in silence. The rain continued to fall. The market was almost empty now. The few people who remained were hurrying home, not paying attention to an old man and a young boy sharing a meal. "How long have you been on the streets?" Pete asked. Danny swallowed before answering. 2 years. Maybe a little more. What happened to your parents?" Danny's hands stopped moving for just a second. Then he continued eating. "My father worked on a transport ship. They were carrying supplies to the Vega colonies when a dragon attacked. The ship was destroyed. Everyone died." He paused. "My mother got sick after that. Radiation sickness. She held on for a year, but then she was gone too." Pete nodded slowly. He had heard this story 1,000 times before. Different names, different places, but always the same ending. The dragons had taken so much from humanity. Even now, 30 years after the last major battle, their shadow still fell over everything. "I'm sorry," Pete said. It was not enough. It was never enough. But it was all he had. Danny shrugged. "It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. It just happened. Does anybody take care of you? Is there a shelter or a school?" "There's a shelter on the east side," Danny said. "They let me sleep there sometimes, but I don't like it. The other kids steal things. The adults ask too many questions." He looked up at Pete. "I do better on my own." Pete almost smiled. He remembered feeling the same way when he was young. After the dragons burned his homeworld and killed his family, he had refused to stay in the refugee camps. He had worked on ships, learned to fight, made his own way through the galaxy. It had been hard, but it had made him strong. "You're a tough kid," Pete said. "But the streets are dangerous, especially for someone your age." "I know," Danny said, "but I can handle it. I'm not afraid." Pete studied the boy's face. He saw the truth there. Danny was not lying. He was not trying to seem brave. He genuinely was not afraid. And that worried Pete more than anything else. A child who was not afraid of danger was a child who did not understand what danger could do. The rain began to slow down. The clouds were starting to break apart, and a few stars were visible through the gaps. Pete looked up at them. Somewhere out there, beyond the light of this colony's sun, the dragons were still alive, waiting, watching. Humanity had won the war, but the war was not over. It would never be over. Pete made a decision. He did not think about it. He did not plan it. It just happened, the way all the important decisions in his life had happened. "Listen to me, Danny," he said. "I'm going to give you something. It's not charity. It's a deal. You come to this stall every day at sunset. You eat a real meal, not leftovers. In return, you tell me about your day. What you did, what you saw, what you learned. Do we have an agreement?" Danny looked at him with suspicion. "Why would you do that?" "Because someone did it for me once," Pete said. "A long time ago, when I was young and alone and angry at the universe. Someone showed me kindness when I did not deserve it. Now it's my turn to pass that kindness on." Danny was quiet for a long moment. The last of the rain dripped from the roof of the stall. The stars grew brighter above them. Finally, Danny nodded. "Okay," he said. "It's a deal." Pete reached across the table and shook the boy's hand. Danny's grip was stronger than he expected. The grip of a survivor. Neither of them knew it then, but that simple handshake would change the course of human history. It would lead to discoveries that would reshape the galaxy. It would answer questions that humanity had been asking for generations. And it would prove, once and for all, that the greatest power in the universe was not the fire of dragons or the weapons of warships. It was the simple act of one person choosing to help another. But all of that was still in the future. For now, there was only an old man and a young boy, sitting together as the rain stopped and the stars came out, sharing a meal and the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. The weeks passed slowly at first, then faster. Every evening at sunset, Danny came to the food stall in the lower market. Every evening, Pete was waiting for him with a hot meal and a patient ear. They talked about small things at first. The weather, the ships coming and going from the spaceport, the strange foods that traders brought from distant worlds. But as time went on, their conversations grew deeper. Danny began to trust the old man. He told Pete about his life on the streets, about the hiding places he used, about the people who tried to hurt him and the ones who sometimes helped. And Pete listened to every word, never judging, never lecturing, just listening. In return, Pete told Danny about his past. Not the stories from the history books, not the legends of the great dragon fighter, but the real stories. The ones that hurt. One evening, when the summer heat had finally broken and a cool breeze was blowing through the market, Danny asked the question he had been wanting to ask for weeks. Why did you become a dragon fighter? Pete was quiet for a long time. He stared at the table, at his scarred hands, at the metal leg that had replaced the one a dragon had taken from him. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and distant. I was born on a world called Green Harbor, he said. It was a farming colony. Beautiful place. Forests and rivers and fields that went on forever. My father was a farmer. My mother was a teacher. I had 2 sisters and a little brother. We were happy. He stopped. Danny waited. I was 11 years old when the dragons came, Pete continued. It was harvest time. The sky was clear and blue. I was helping my father in the fields when we heard the sirens. We looked up and saw them. 3 of them, flying out of the sun like something from a nightmare. Pete's hands were shaking now. Danny pretended not to notice. We ran for the shelters, but we were too far from the town. My father told us to hide in the river, under the water, where the dragon fire could not reach us. He said he would draw them away. He said he would come back for us. Pete's voice cracked. He never came back. None of them did. My mother, my sisters, my brother. The dragons burned everything. When I came out of the river, there was nothing left but ashes. Danny did not say anything. There was nothing to say. He reached across the table and put his small hand on top of Pete's scarred one. The old man looked up, surprised. There were tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, Danny said. I know what it's like to lose everyone. Pete nodded slowly. I know you do, son. That's why I'm telling you this. Because you understand. They sat in silence for a while. The market was closing down around them. Vendors were packing up their goods. The lights of the city were coming on in the distance. After Green Harbor, Pete said, I had nothing. No family, no home, no reason to live. But I had anger. So much anger. I swore that I would make the dragons pay for what they did. I joined the fleet as soon as I was old enough. I trained harder than anyone. I became the best pilot, the best gunner, the best tactician. And then I started killing them. Did it help? Danny asked. Did killing them make the pain go away? Pete looked at the boy with something like admiration. It was a wise question for someone so young. For a while, Pete admitted. Every dragon I killed felt like justice. Like I was avenging my family, protecting other families from the same fate. But after a while, the killing became just another job. The anger faded. The pain stayed. I realized that no matter how many dragons I destroyed, I could not bring my family back. I could not undo what had been done. Then why did you keep fighting? Because someone had to, Pete said simply. Because if I stopped, other children would lose their families the way I lost mine. I could not save my own world, but I could save others. That had to be enough. Danny thought about this for a long time. He thought about his father, burned to death in the darkness of space. He thought about his mother, wasting away from sickness while he held her hand and begged her not to leave. He thought about the anger that lived inside him, hot and sharp and always hungry. Do you hate them? Danny asked. The dragons? Pete considered the question carefully. I used to. For many years, I hated them more than anything in the universe. But hate is a heavy thing to carry. It weighs you down. It makes you tired. Now, he sighed. Now I don't know what I feel. They're creatures. They do what their nature tells them to do. Is that evil? Or is it just survival? They killed millions of people, Danny said. There was heat in his voice. They killed my father. I know, Pete said. And I understand your anger. I carried the same anger for most of my life. But let me tell you something, Danny. Something it took me 50 years to learn. He leaned forward, looking into the boy's eyes. Anger can make you strong. It can push you to do things you never thought possible. But it can also destroy you. It can turn you into something you don't recognize. The same fire that drives you forward can burn you up from the inside. He paused. The dragons use fire to destroy. Humans don't have to be the same. We can choose to be different. We can choose to build instead of burn. Danny did not respond right away. He was too young to fully understand what Pete was saying. But somewhere deep inside him, a seed was planted. A seed that would grow over the years, that would shape the man he would become. That would one day change the fate of two species. As the summer turned to autumn, Pete made a decision. He had been thinking about it for weeks, turning it over in his mind, looking at it from every angle. It was crazy. It was probably a mistake. But he was going to do it anyway. He contacted an old friend named Grace Liu. She had served under him on the Ironside, as his second-in-command. Now she worked for the Colonial Authority, pushing papers and making decisions that affected millions of lives. Pete asked her for a favor. "I want to adopt the boy," he told her over the video call. "Danny Marsh, I want to make it official." Grace stared at him through the screen. She was still beautiful, even with the gray in her hair and the lines on her face. But her eyes were worried. "Pete, are you sure about this? You're not exactly young anymore. And with your health?" "My health is fine," Pete lied. The doctors had told him he had maybe 5 years left if he was lucky. The dragonfire radiation had done too much damage over too many decades. But Grace did not need to know that. "That boy needs a home," Pete continued. "He needs someone to believe in him. Someone to teach him. I can be that person. I want to be that person." Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, just a little. "You always were a stubborn old fool," she said. "Fine, I'll push the paperwork through. But Pete, take care of yourself. And take care of that boy." "I will," Pete promised. "I will." The adoption was finalized on a cold autumn morning. Danny moved into Pete's small apartment in the Veterans Quarter. It was not much. 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen, a view of the spaceport. But for the first time in years, it felt like a home. On his first night in his new room, Danny found an old photograph on the shelf. It showed a young man in a military uniform standing in front of a massive warship. The man was smiling. He looked happy and strong and full of hope. "Is this you?" Danny asked. Pete nodded. "A long time ago. Before the scars. Before the metal leg. Before everything." Danny looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he looked at Pete. The old man and the young soldier in the picture were almost unrecognizable as the same person. But the eyes were the same. Still watching. Still fighting. "Thank you," Danny said quietly. "For everything?" Pete put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't thank me yet, son. This is just the beginning." He was right. It was only the beginning, and neither of them could have imagined where it would lead. 3 years had passed since Danny moved into Pete's apartment. He was 30 now, tall for his age, with serious eyes and a quick mind. He went to school during the day and spent his evenings studying or talking with Pete. The old man had become more than a father to him. He had become a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. Pete's health was getting worse. He tried to hide it, but Danny could see the truth. The old dragon fighter was dying. The radiation that had accumulated in his body over decades of combat was slowly poisoning him from the inside. Some days he could barely get out of bed. Some nights Danny heard him coughing in his room, a terrible wet sound that seemed to go on forever. But Pete never complained. He never talked about death or regret. Instead, he focused on Danny. He made sure the boy did his homework. He told him stories about the war and the worlds he had seen. He answered every question Danny asked, no matter how difficult or painful. One evening, while Pete was resting, Danny decided to clean the apartment. He started with the main room, then moved to the kitchen, and finally to the storage closet that Pete kept locked. The lock was old and rusty. Danny did not mean to break it, but when he pulled on the door, it came open with a snap dot. Inside the closet were boxes full of old things. Medals and uniforms and photographs. Letters from people Danny did not know. And at the back, hidden behind everything else, a metal container covered in dust. Danny pulled it out and wiped it clean. The container was military grade, the kind used to store important documents or dangerous materials. There were classification codes stamped on the side, faded but still visible. Danny knew he should not open it. He knew Pete had kept it hidden for a reason. But curiosity was stronger than caution. Inside the container were data crystals. Small, clear objects that could hold more information than 1,000 books. Danny picked one up and looked at it. He could not read what was stored on it without a special device. But there was something else in the container. A piece of paper, yellowed with age, covered in handwritten notes. The notes were in Pete's handwriting. They described star charts and coordinates, calculations and distances. At the bottom of the page, circled 3 times, was a single word. Nursery. Danny stared at the word. He did not know what it meant, but something about it made his heart beat faster. He put the paper back in the container and closed it carefully. Then he waited for Pete to wake up. That night, after dinner, Danny showed Pete what he had found. The old man's face went pale. His hands trembled as he took the container from Danny. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just sat there, holding the box, staring at it like it was a bomb that might explode. "Where did you find this?" he finally asked. "In the storage closet." "I'm sorry. I was cleaning, and the lock broke and I saw it. Danny trailed off. "I'm sorry. I should not have looked." Pete shook his head slowly. "No, maybe it's good that you did. Maybe it's time." He opened the container and took out the piece of paper with the coordinates. His eyes moved over the handwriting, reading words he had written decades ago. "During the war," Pete said, "we captured a dragon. It was badly wounded, dying. Our scientists tried to communicate with it, to learn about the enemy. They failed. But before it died, it gave us something. A gift, or maybe a warning. We never knew which." Danny leaned forward, listening intently. "It gave us coordinates. A location in deep space, beyond the edge of human territory. We sent a probe to investigate. What we found..." Pete stopped and closed his eyes. "What we found changed everything we thought we knew about the dragons." "What was it?" Danny asked. Pete opened his eyes and looked at his adopted son. There was pain in his gaze, and guilt, and something that might have been fear. "A nursery," he said. "The place where dragons are born. A nebula surrounding a dying star, filled with thousands of dragons. Adults, juveniles, eggs. The entire future of their species, all in one place." Danny's mind raced. He understood immediately what Pete was saying. "You could have destroyed them," he said. "You could have ended the war. Killed all the dragons forever." "Yes," Pete said. "We could have." One bomb, dropped into the heart of that star, would have caused a chain reaction. The explosion would have killed every dragon in the nebula. The eggs, the young ones, the breeding adults. All of them. The species would have been wiped out completely. But you didn't do it. No, we didn't. Pete set the paper down on the table. His hands were still shaking. The High Command made the decision. They classified the information and destroyed most of the records. Only a few copies survived. This is one of them. Danny could not believe what he was hearing. Why? Why didn't they do it? The dragons killed millions of people. They destroyed entire worlds. They were the enemy, because it would have been genocide, Pete said quietly. The complete extinction of a thinking species. Yes, the dragons were our enemies. Yes, they had done terrible things. But they were alive. They had thoughts and feelings and families of their own. Destroying them all, even the eggs, even the ones that had never harmed anyone, that would have made us something worse than they ever were. Danny stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of the city glowed against the dark sky. Ships moved overhead, carrying people and cargo between the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the light of human civilization, the dragons were still alive, waiting, breeding, preparing. I don't understand, Danny said. They're monsters. They killed my father. They killed your family. How can you defend them? Pete rose from his chair slowly, his metal leg clicking against the floor. He walked to Danny's side and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. I'm not defending what they did, Pete said. What they did was terrible, unforgivable. But there's a difference between fighting an enemy and wiping them from existence. There's a line that humans must not cross, no matter how much we want to, no matter how much we hate. What line? Pete turned Danny to face him. His old eyes were filled with tears. The line between justice and murder, he said. Between war and genocide. Between being human and being something else. If we had destroyed that nursery, we would have won the war. But we would have lost ourselves. We would have become the very thing we were fighting against. Danny wanted to argue. He wanted to scream that Pete was wrong, that the dragons deserved to die, that mercy was weakness. But the words would not come. Instead, he thought about the stories Pete had told him. Stories about good men who did terrible things and never recovered. Stories about victories that felt like defeats. What happens now? Danny asked. The coordinates still exist. Someone could still use them. Pete nodded. Yes, that's why I kept them. I don't know what I thought. Maybe I was waiting for someone who could make a better choice than I did. Someone who could see a path that I was too blind or too angry to find. He looked at Danny with an expression that was part hope and part fear. Maybe that someone is you. Danny stared at the old man. The weight of what Pete was saying settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Me? I'm just a kid. I don't know anything about dragons or war or any of this. You know more than you think, Pete said. You know what it's like to lose everything. You know what it's like to hate. But you also know what it's like to be shown kindness by a stranger. To be given a second chance when you had nothing. He pressed the piece of paper into Danny's hands. Keep this. Study it. Think about it. Someday, when you're older, you'll have to make a choice. The same choice that was given to me and the men and women who came before me. What you do with that choice is up to you. Danny looked down at the coordinates in his hands. Numbers and letters that could mean the salvation of humanity or the extinction of an entire species. He did not know what to do. He did not know what was right, but he knew that someday he would have to find out. 7 years had passed since Danny found the coordinates. He was 20 years old now, a young man with broad shoulders and steady hands. He had graduated at the top of his class from the Colonial Fleet Academy, with honors in xenobiology and astrogation. Everyone said he had a bright future ahead of him. But Danny knew that his future was tied to a secret that few people in the galaxy knew existed. Pete had died 2 years ago. The old dragon fighter had passed quietly in his sleep, with Danny holding his hand. His last words had been simple. Make me proud, son. Danny had wept for days. Pete was the only family he had ever truly known. The only person who had believed in him when he was nothing but a hungry boy on the streets. But grief had a way of turning into purpose. And Danny's purpose was clear. He had spent years studying the coordinates Pete had given him. He had learned everything he could about dragons, their biology, their behavior, their history with humanity. And the more he learned, the more questions he had. Questions that could only be answered by going to the nursery himself. Getting there would not be easy. The coordinates were still classified at the highest level. No civilian ship could reach that part of space. But Danny had a plan. He requested an assignment on the survey vessel Meadowlark under the command of Captain Ruth Espinosa. The Meadowlark was scheduled to map uncharted territories beyond the Outer Rim. It was the perfect cover for what Danny really wanted to do. Captain Espinosa was a tall woman with gray eyes and a scar that ran from her forehead to her chin. She had lost her brother to a dragon attack when she was young and had spent her career charting safe routes through dangerous space. She was tough, fair, and completely dedicated to protecting human lives. "Why do you want this assignment, Ensign?" she asked Danny during his interview. "Most Academy graduates want the big ships, the combat postings, the glory. Survey work is slow and boring." "I want to learn, Captain," Danny said. "I want to see what's out there. And I think I can help." Ruth studied him for a long moment. Something in his eyes seemed to interest her. "You're Pete Callahan's boy, aren't you?" she said. "The one he adopted." Danny nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He was a legend. One of the greatest dragon fighters who ever lived." She leaned back in her chair. "Must be hard, living in that shadow. He taught me that the hardest battles are not fought with weapons," Danny said. "He taught me that true strength is knowing when not to fight." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "An interesting philosophy for a military officer. I learned it from an interesting man." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, just a little. "Welcome to the Meadowlark, Ensign. Don't make me regret this." The journey took 3 weeks. The Meadowlark jumped from star system to star system, moving further and further from human space. The crew was small, only 30 people, and Danny kept mostly to himself. He studied his data, ran simulations, and waited. On the 15th day, he went to Captain Espinosa with his proposal. "I have coordinates I would like to investigate," he said, handing her a data pad. A location that was discovered during the war but never properly surveyed. Ruth looked at the coordinates, then looked at Danny. Her expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Where did you get this?" "From my father. He was part of the team that found it." "And what exactly are we going to find there?" Danny took a deep breath. He had thought about this moment for years. How to explain, how to convince, how to make her understand. "The dragon nursery," he said. "The place where they breed, where their eggs are kept. The heart of their species." Ruth stood very still. The datapad trembled slightly in her hand. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that you know where the dragons come from, where they raise their young, and you want me to take my ship there?" "Yes, Captain." "Why? What do you hope to accomplish?" Danny met her gaze steadily. "I hope to find answers. The dragons have been our enemies for 100 years. We fought them, killed them, pushed them back. But we've never truly understood them. Maybe if we did, we could find another way." "Another way than what?" "Than endless war." Ruth set the datapad down on her desk. She walked to the window and stared out at the stars. "My brother was 12 when the dragons took him," she said. "We were on a transport, heading to a new colony. The dragons came out of nowhere. My brother was in the wrong part of the ship. He died screaming while I hid in a cargo container and listened." Danny said nothing. He understood that kind of pain. "I've spent my whole life hating them," Ruth continued. "I've dreamed about finding that nursery, about dropping a bomb on it and watching them all burn. Justice for my brother. Justice for everyone they've killed." She turned back to face Danny. "But you're not talking about justice, are you?" You're talking about something else. I'm talking about a choice, Danny said. The same choice my father faced. The same choice humanity has been avoiding for 50 years. We can destroy them. We have the power. But should we? Is extinction the answer? Or is there something better? Ruth was silent for a long time. The ship hummed around them, engines pushing them deeper into unknown space. If I take you there, she finally said, and we find what you're looking for, what happens next? I don't know, Danny admitted. But I know this. My father spent his whole life fighting dragons. He killed more of them than almost anyone. And at the end, he told me that the hardest kind of strength is knowing when not to kill. He believed there had to be a better way. He just never found it. He stepped forward, his voice intense. Maybe we can find it. Maybe this is our chance to do something different. Something that doesn't end in blood and fire. My father gave his life fighting the dragons. I want to honor that sacrifice. But I also want to honor what he believed. That humanity can be better than its worst instincts. Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the datapad and entered the coordinates into the navigation system. All hands, she announced over the ship's intercom. We have a change of course. New destination in 3 days. This is a survey mission. Weapons are to remain offline unless I give a direct order otherwise. She looked at Danny with something that might have been respect or might have been doubt. I hope you know what you're doing, Ensign. Because if you're wrong, we might all die out here. I know, Danny said. But if I'm right, we might change everything. 3 days later, the Meadowlark dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of a nebula larger than any Danny had ever seen. It glowed with red and orange light, swirling clouds of gas and dust surrounding a dying star at its center. And within those clouds, moving slowly through the cosmic fire, were dragons. Thousands of them. They were beautiful and terrible. Massive creatures with wings that stretched for kilometers, bodies that pulsed with inner light, eyes that burned like stars. Some were sleeping, coiled around rocks and asteroids. Some were swimming through the gas clouds, graceful as fish in water. And everywhere, floating in the warmth of the dying star, were eggs. Millions of eggs, glowing with the promise of life. The bridge of the Meadowlark was completely silent. Every member of the crew stared at the view screen, unable to speak. Danny stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Captain, he said quietly, we're here. What do we do now? Ruth Espinosa looked at the dragons. She looked at the eggs. She looked at the weapons console, where a single command could unleash enough firepower to destroy everything in front of them. Then she looked at Danny. Now, she said, we make a choice. The Meadowlark hung at the edge of the nebula for 3 days. Captain Ruth Espinosa had ordered complete silence. No signals, no scans, no movement that might draw attention. They watched the dragons drift through the cosmic clouds, and the dragons did not seem to notice them at all. On the 3rd day, Ruth called Danny to her quarters. We can't stay here forever, she said. Sooner or later, we have to make a decision. We have enough firepower to cause serious damage. One antimatter torpedo into that star, and the chain reaction would. She stopped and shook her head. You know what it would do. I know, Danny said. It would kill them all. Every dragon in this nebula. The eggs, the young ones, the adults. All of them. And that would end the war. Forever. No more dragon attacks. No more children burned alive. No more families destroyed. Ruth's voice was steady, but her hands were not. My brother would finally have justice. Danny looked at her with compassion. Would it be justice? Or would it be revenge? Ruth did not answer. She walked to the window and stared at the swirling clouds of the nebula. My whole life, I've believed that the only good dragon was a dead dragon, she said quietly. Every decision I've made, Every path I've chosen has been built on that belief. And now you're asking me to question everything. I'm not asking you to forget what they did, Danny said. I'm asking you to consider what we might become if we do this. My father killed 17 dragons. He was one of the greatest warriors humanity ever produced. And at the end of his life, he told me that the killing haunted him. Not because he felt guilty, but because he never knew if there could have been another way. He stepped closer to Ruth. What if there is another way? What if we're the ones who can find it? Ruth was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to face him. What do you propose? Danny had been thinking about this for years. Ever since Pete gave him the coordinates, he had studied everything humanity knew about the dragons. Their biology, their behavior, their patterns of attack. And he had found something interesting. The dragons communicate, he said. We've known this for decades. They send electromagnetic pulses across space, signals that allow them to coordinate attacks and share information. We've never been able to understand those signals. But I believe we can learn. Learn to talk to them? Yes, not attack them. Not destroy them. Talk to them. Find out why they attacked us in the first place. See if we can reach an agreement. Ruth stared at him like he had lost his mind. You want to negotiate with creatures that have killed millions of people? Creatures that burned your own father alive? I want to try, Danny said. Because if we don't try, the only option left is genocide. And I don't want humanity to become a species that wipes out another thinking race simply because we have the power to do it. Ruth sat down heavily in her chair. She looked tired, older than her years. The Colonial Council will never approve this, she said. When we get back and report what we found, they'll send a fleet. They'll do what we couldn't. They'll destroy this place and everyone in it. Then, we don't go back, Danny said. Not yet. We stay here. We study them. We learn. And when we have something to show, something that proves communication is possible, then we go back. We give the Council a choice they've never had before. It was a dangerous plan. They would be disobeying orders, risking their careers, possibly their lives. But Ruth looked into Danny's eyes and saw something she had not seen in a long time. Hope. True. Genuine hope that things could be different. Your father really meant that much to you, she said. He saved my life, Danny replied. He taught me that the measure of a person is not how much they can destroy, but how much they can build. He was a warrior, but he wanted to be a peacemaker. He never got the chance. I want to honor that. Ruth stood up and extended her hand. All right, Ensign. Let's see if we can make peace with monsters. The work took 3 years. Danny led a small team of scientists who stayed behind in the nebula while the Meadowlark made occasional supply runs back to human space. They told the Colonial Authority they were conducting a long-term survey of an unusual stellar phenomenon. It was not entirely a lie that the breakthrough came in the 2nd year. One of the scientists, a xenobiologist named Nora Reyes, discovered that the dragon's electromagnetic pulses followed patterns similar to human language. Not words exactly, but concepts, feelings, images. They built a device that could translate those patterns into something humans could understand. And they built another device that could send human thoughts back in the same way. The first message they sent was simple. We do not want war. For 3 days, there was no response. Danny barely slept. He stood at the observation window, watching the dragons drift through the nebula, wondering if they had heard, wondering if they cared. On the 4th day, the answer came. It was not words. It was a flood of images and emotions that overwhelmed the translation device and brought tears to Danny's eyes. He saw the dragons' history, their memories passed down through generations. He saw them traveling through the void of space, ancient and beautiful and alone. He saw them finding planets rich with energy, the same planets where humans later built their colonies. He saw them defending their hunting grounds against strange, small creatures that came in metal ships and brought fire and death. He understood. The dragons had not attacked humanity out of malice. They had attacked because humans had invaded their territory. They had been defending themselves, just as humans had defended themselves. Both species had been fighting a war born of misunderstanding. Danny sent another message. We did not know. We came in peace, and we brought war by accident. Can we start again? The response was cautious, but hopeful. The dragons were willing to talk. It took 5 more years to reach an agreement. Danny traveled back and forth between human space and the nebula, carrying messages, building understanding, slowly convincing both sides that peace was possible. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. There were setbacks and failures, moments when everything seemed about to collapse into violence. But Danny never gave up. The Treaty of the Red Nebula was signed on a space station built at the boundary between human territory and dragon space. Representatives from both species came together for the first time in history, not to fight, but to make peace. Danny stood before the assembled delegates and spoke. Humanity has always defined itself by strength, he said. We crossed oceans, conquered the sky, and claimed the stars. When the dragons stood in our way, we learned to kill them. And we became very good at killing. We could have destroyed them completely. We had that power. He paused, looking around the room. Human faces and dragon faces watching him together. But power is not what makes us human. Choice is. The choice to show mercy when none is expected. The choice to build bridges instead of burning them. The choice to see our enemies not as monsters, but as beings with their own right to exist. He thought of Pete, an old man at a food stall, offering a meal to a hungry boy. Such a small act of kindness. Such an enormous consequence. An old man once taught me that truth, Danny continued. He gave me his leftovers, and then he gave me something far more valuable, the belief that humanity could be better than its worst moments. Today, we prove him right. The treaty was ratified. The war was over. 20 years later, Danny Marsh stood before a small memorial in New Phoenix City. His daughter Lily held his hand. She was 10 years old, the same age Danny had been when Pete found him. Is it true you used to be homeless? She asked. For a little while, Danny said, before your grandfather found me. And he really killed dragons? He did, many of them. He was one of the greatest warriors who ever lived. Danny smiled softly. But he taught me that the hardest kind of strength is knowing when not to kill. Lily looked up at the sky, where a dragon patrol ship moved silently through the atmosphere. It was part of the joint defense force that now protected the colony. Dragons and humans working together. Do you think he would be happy? She asked. With how things turned out. Danny remembered a cold night, a warm meal, and an old warrior's kindness. He remembered a simple question that had changed his life. Can I have the leftovers? Yes, sweetheart, he said. I think he would be very proud. Above them, the stars shone bright, a galaxy at peace, full of possibility and hope. And somewhere in that vast darkness, the dragons flew free, no longer enemies but neighbors, sharing the universe with a species that had chosen mercy over destruction. It had started with a simple act of kindness. It had ended with the salvation of 2 civilizations, and it proved, once and for all, that the greatest power in the universe was not fire or weapons or the ability to destroy. It was the choice to be human.